James. This is James Higdon, author of Cornbread Mafia, a homegrown syndicate's code of silence and the biggest marijuana bust in American history. Thank you so much for taking your time to meet with me this morning. I'm really excited just to learn a little more about the Cornbread Mafia.
Thanks for having me.
What is, if you don't mind, what is the Cornbread Mafia?
So thanks for asking. It's a term that's been thrown around quite a bit in other contexts, but strictly speaking, when we're talking about Cornbread Mafia, the term originates to describe a group of superlative outlaw cannabis growers operating in Kentucky in the 70s and the 80s. Mm-hmm. Very specifically, the first time Cornbread Mafia is used publicly is at a press conference held by federal prosecutors in the summer of 1989 to describe what they more specifically called the Marion County Marijuana Cooperative, because these outlaw cannabis growers were centered in a area in central Kentucky called Marion County. It's also my hometown. So I grew up around all this activity. And then after that press conference where, not to get ahead of myself, so this press conference detailed the activities of 70 men from central Kentucky that had been caught over the previous 5 years on 30 farms in 10 states with what the law enforcement said was 185 tons of marijuana.
Wow, that's quite large.
Of these 70, hang on a second. So of these 70 who were caught, none of them talked or cooperated. So the feds had an idea of what this whole organization looked like, but because none of them talked, there was no ability to run a case because there were no witnesses. So instead of running a case in the courtroom, they held a press conference to the media and laid out their case to the media. In the course of this press conference, referred to these guys as Cornbread Mafia for the first time. And that term kind of caught the imagination of news editors. It was in headlines and wire services, and it created kind of a media circus around my hometown and brought a lot of notoriety to us. And then subsequently to that, after 1989, any kind of Southern tinged organized crime activity or any people in the South who wanted to appear tough started referring to themselves as Cornbread Mafia when they actually had no connection to this group in Kentucky that had been called it originally.
Gotcha. And did you ever hear of the Cornbread Mafia in Tennessee? And if so, what parts of Tennessee?
I have not heard of actual Cornbread Mafia activity in Tennessee. What's fascinating about the press conference that was held in 1989 detailing their cannabis growing activities was that all of the states that they were busted in outside of Kentucky were all Midwest and Plains states. So they were in Michigan, Minnesota, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska. They were north and they were west. There was no documented activity of the actual Cornbread Mafia cultivating any cannabis in Tennessee.
Gotcha. And does the Cornbread Mafia even still exist this day and age, the real Cornbread Mafia?
The guys who were arrested associated with Cornbread Mafia that the federal government assumed were the ringleaders are all out of prison now and back home. But in terms of active mass scale outlaw cannabis growing like they were conducting back in the 80s, no, that activity does not exist.
Gotcha. And was the Cornbread, or whether you know or not, was the Cornbread Mafia a violent syndicate back in the 70s and 80s when all this stuff was transpiring?
Well, there's two ways to answer that. One, of these 70 guys that were arrested across 10 states that were principally the group that was first referred to as Cornbread Mafia, none of those 70 men were charged with violent crime. All of those crimes were exclusively for cannabis cultivation. None of those guys in subsequent arrests have ever, to my knowledge, been charged, prosecuted, convicted for violent crime. Now, working in an illegal industry at the scale and size these guys were operating at often would necessitate the sorts of activity and we'll call it conflict resolution that would veer into violence because there's no access to civil litigation or these sorts of things. Disagreements are resolved physically in these environments. So it's not like they were all playing patty cake. There was definitely some violence associated with outlaw cannabis growing. But in terms of what we're talking about as Cornbread Mafia has popped up recently in Tennessee, there's not been any sort of human trafficking associated with Cornbread Mafia ever.
Right. And can you explain to me what it was like being one of the first journalists subpoenaed under the Obama administration to speak about your relationship with Johnny Boone?
It was not pleasant, I'll tell you that.
I can only imagine. Just to elaborate on that, was there any backlash from the Cornbread Mafia over that, or because
no, there wasn't, because I did the right thing. To give you some context, I spent several years reporting the story, and in the context of reporting the story, interviewed a gentleman named Johnny Boone, who the government in the 80s assumed was one of the ringleaders of this operation. I spoke with him off and on for over a year in the window of 2007, 2008. In the course of reporting on him and interviewing him, he got in trouble again, allegedly growing cannabis again on his farm in the spring of 2008. And he became a fugitive. Mm-hmm. And the federal government, the law enforcement raided his property, his house, found materials in his house that connected him to me because I'd been meeting with him for a year. At that point, I had moved out of Kentucky back to New York City. And so I was living in New York while this manhunt for Johnny Boone was going on. The feds assumed that I knew things about his potential whereabouts that might help their case for their manhunt to find him. I was not interested in sharing any information that they might want to have. I was a journalist interviewing people. I wasn't going to divulge sources to the government. Right. There were photographs that I had taken of Johnny Boone in a location that was very, very clearly not Kentucky. The photograph that's on the cover of the Cornbread Mafia book of Johnny Boone with no shirt in what appears to be a tropical location. I took that photograph. The federal government knew that I took that photograph because I'd made one set of prints of that photograph, had given it to Johnny Boone. And then when the feds raided his property, they found the one set of photographs that I'd made for him. So they wanted to know where I'd taken those photographs, and I was not interested in telling them. Right.
Were you able to, as a journalist myself, were you able to overcome that? Because, I've always, was taught that we have protection as journalists.
Well, you do and you don't. So First Amendment protections for journalists First Amendment protections generally are different in each circuit court, and different circuits have different permissions for journalists, depending on which circuit you're in. The circuit that we're in Kentucky is not great. And so our initial motion to quash the subpoena on simple First Amendment grounds was not granted by the judge. Now, what that means is, strictly speaking, procedurally, if a federal grand jury wants you to speak and you are a journalist and don't want to, what happens is you go into the grand jury, you don't answer questions, and then the prosecutor puts you before the judge. The judge grants you immunity, whether you ask for it or want it or not. That's a concept called forced immunity. And then once you're granted immunity, if you don't answer questions in the grand jury, then you're held in contempt, and then you're subject to 18 months in prison. Yeah. So that's the process that I was looking down the barrel on in the morning of, I believe, February 9th, 2009. No, it wasn't the 9th. It was later in the month. It was February of 2009. And what happened was my motion to quash the subpoena was not successful, but the prosecutor realized that if I was claiming journalistic protections, had he followed Justice Department procedure for subpoenaing a member of the news media, and did I qualify for that, those protections that the Justice Department have outlined. So there's a 5-page guideline in the Justice Department rule book for prosecutors about what to do with news media. Did I qualify for that, and had they followed that? They had not followed that, and I did qualify. Even though I wasn't currently employed by a news organization, I was on a book contract with a publisher. I had earned income from the previous year as a freelancer from a variety of known outlets. And I was a not too recent graduate of the Columbia Journalism School. So my bona fides as a journalist, even though I wasn't working as a member of a news media organization at the time, qualified me for these protections. And those protections are the prosecutor is required to meet with the journalist, with an attorney, to see if they can get the information that they need without subpoenaing them, without putting them in front of a grand jury. They have to exhaust all these options until there's no option left. And they just hadn't done that. And U.S. attorneys' offices that aren't New York or DC or LA, that aren't used to dealing with media on a regular basis, don't often know how to interact with media and feel like they can steamroll them just like they can everyone else. So it's important for journalists and citizen journalists to know that with a good attorney, you can stand up and force the government to at least slow down the process to confirm that your First Amendment rights are not violated.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, you said that you're from the county that this whole Cornbread Mafia was kind of formed in. Is that what drew you to this particular story?
Sure. Growing up, when all this went down, I was in middle school. It was very traumatic to the community, to my parents and my parents' peers in the adult community. Like as a kid, you could see it being a real problem for the community, not just in terms of a small community being singled out by the federal government and the media as this bad place, but what that did to the economic development of our community, to the school system, to the general well-being of the community was negatively affected by the notoriety. And it just was fascinating also because there was this disconnect between what we're being told in public about the nature of drug dealers and drugs being bad, and these people that were being singled out and targeted in our community relative to the Cornbread Mafia did not seem to be outrageously bad people. They were parents of our classmates. They were people. They were members of the community. They were, a little wild and somewhat transgressive. They drove cars that were crazy and did crazy things, but they were still members of the community and weren't seen as dangerous, violent, evil people. They were parents of classmates.
It was more of a stigma probably at the time related to, cannabis consumption and growth.
Oh, 100%. It was pure Reagan propaganda against cannabis and laid down heavy on my hometown. Right. So that story and how it affected my community just stayed with me. And I went off to school to be a writer, to tell a story. And I had this story kind of like I had somewhat of a hold on it, but didn't know quite how to tell it, and just knew that that was important. That had some cultural relevance, that people needed to know about it. And so that's what compelled me to.
And living it, I'm sure, had a lot to do with it too, because you had more inside knowledge than really anybody that would be writing a book like this.
Right. Without being from the community, there would be no way to have cracked into that story. Like, people hadn't talked about it for 20 years and talked to me about it for the first time.
Right. Now, have you ever heard about Summer Wells, the missing 5-year-old girl from Rogersville, Tennessee?
Not until the Dr. Phil episode.
And what did you think when, we still haven't determined where the first time we heard Cornbread Mafia be brought up except Dr. Phil. And when you heard that on the Dr. Phil show, what went through your head with all this knowledge of the Cornbread Mafia?
Oh, here we go again.
Gotcha.
Not the first time that Cornbread Mafia has been evoked in a context that is not accurate.
Mm-hmm. And let's see, did you hear the Cornbread Mafia might be involved? And what did you think about that? I think you just answered that. Have you ever heard of the Cornbread Mafia ever taking children? And I think
No.
you spoke about that just briefly earlier. You're telling me that they had children in schools and things of that nature. Sound like family folks that lived on the wild side. So the idea of them taking children or putting children into the trafficking children, what are your feelings about that? How would you explain to the audience, in conjunction with the Cornbread Mafia?
That it's completely inaccurate and unfair, and does a huge disservice to these men who were prosecuted as Cornbread Mafia, who sacrificed decades of their life on nonviolent cannabis cultivation crimes in order to protect members of their own families and their own communities, to then disparage their reputation by associating them with cheap human trafficking is really frustrating, and just I don't have the words this morning to describe exactly how I feel about it, but it makes me angry when people throw this Cornbread Mafia term around to try to gain some notoriety around something that the people who were truly associated with the Cornbread Mafia had nothing to do with.
Right. And we were out, a group of us on my team, and one of them reached out to you, Jonathan Lee Riches, AKA JLR. We went out to Rogersville, Tennessee, and a few of the things that we asked, anywhere we stopped, we asked, workers at stores, workers at fast food joints, people on the road, if they've ever heard about Cornbread Mafia ever being in Tennessee, ever heard about anything. And all of them, I didn't meet one person in Rogersville, Tennessee, or the Hawkins County area, or even Sullivan County for that matter, that said that they've ever heard of the Cornbread Mafia ever being in Tennessee. So, I was a little taken back of where this Cornbread Mafia came up and how they would be associated with the Summer Wells case. I never really believed it personally, that they were ever involved, and actually did another podcast several months ago, actually asking the Cornbread Mafia, if any member wants to come and talk to me, I believe you. I don't think you had anything to do with this. I didn't get a call, but I did throw that out there for them. So how much time did the members of the Cornbread Mafia receive in their sentencing?
Anywhere from 6 months to 35 years.
Oh, wow. And I'm assuming Johnny Boone was the one that got the 35 years?
No, he did time, but he didn't do 35. He did shy of 10 or 15, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
In late 87, out in 2002 or 2003. Another guy did the 35. There were a couple of 20-year sentences in between there too.
Gotcha. So, but most everybody, or if not everybody, has now been released from jail,
including including one guy who was in prison for life without parole for 3 strikes violations, all for cannabis cultivation. His prison sentence was commuted by President Obama.
Wow, that's amazing. And the only reason I say that is because, we're in the true crime community, and to hear that somebody's getting a life sentence, I mean, in this day and age, a life sentence over cannabis cultivation is just insane to me. When we hear stories of somebody murdering somebody and getting 15 years or 20 years, it's amazing to me. It's just, it blows my mind. It blows my mind. Let me ask you point blank, do you believe, with your vast knowledge, just on the record, your vast knowledge of the Cornbread Mafia, everything you know about them, I mean, you lived it, you grew up with it, you wrote about it, do you think they had anything to do with Summer Wells' disappearance?
No.
Okay. So I hear that you have a new venture that you're kind of put your pen and pencil away, and your writing days are kind of behind you. Tell me what you're doing these days.
Sure. So the success of the Cornbread Mafia book led me into a journalism career. I was covering cannabis policy for national publications. And in 2018, while we were covering the Farm Bill that was going to legalize hemp for good, realized it was this amazing opportunity to start a hemp brand. And so I joined forces with my cousin, Eric Zipperly, who's now my CEO. And we founded Cornbread Hemp. Cornbread Hemp is a CBD company based here in Kentucky. We make full spectrum certified organic CBD products. We use flower only extraction, and that makes some of the best CBD products in America. And we ship to all 50 states and U.S. territories. And this is the culmination of my life's work, telling the story of the Cornbread Mafia, leading me into a journalism career, and now creating a brand that brings a Kentucky agricultural product legally to everyone in America.
It's amazing, night and day from the days of your book being written to today, you being, legally able to make hemp products is pretty amazing. And it shows the changes in perception of the hemp, the cannabis, stuff. And for years, I heard in medical journals, them speak very highly of cannabis products and all the good benefits that they do for people medically as well. So I'm kind of glad that they have moved that over. Explain to us what sets your hemp apart from other hemp on the market.
Well, a few things. One, certified organic is very important because there's no other federal regulations on CBD products. And so if you're looking for a quality product, the only way to really know very quickly is with that USDA organic seal. And there's other organic CBD products, but we're the only one that is a flower only extraction, which means no stems and sticks and leaves in our product. And you can tell that quality in the first taste of it. And then also we're leaning into the THC that we're allowed to offer.
Gotcha.
We offer up to 2 milligrams of THC per serving, along with 50 milligrams of CBD in our gummies and our stronger oils. And that makes a big difference.
And that actually brings me to another question is what kind of products does your hemp sell? You're talking about gummies, some oils. Why don't you go over maybe some of your top product lines?
Sure. Our top sellers is our organic CBD gummies. We're the only certified organic CBD gummy in America, and followed very closely by our CBD oils. And then we have a full line of certified organic CBD topicals, lotions, and balm. We sell capsules, and we have a pet product as well for pet owners with pets who are either anxious or have mobility problems.
Gotcha. Yeah. And tell our audience how they could purchase some of your Cornbread Hemp products.
They can find us at cornbreadhemp.com. They can find us on Twitter at Cornbread Hemp and on Instagram at Cornbread_hemp.
Awesome. Well, Jim, I appreciate all your time. I know you have been busy and we've worked very hard to get this interview together.
I apologize for the scheduling issues.
That is okay. I'm so thankful that I got to speak with you. I really thought that you were more of an expert than anybody else. I mean, you wrote a book about the Cornbread Mafia, and if anybody could set the tone and explain what they were, what they have been, if they are still today, would be you. And I'm just so thankful for your time. Thank you so much. And I will make sure that when I run this, which I'm going to run it later this afternoon, ways for people to go on your Instagram and Twitter are available to the audience.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.